The longtime president of Belarus said that his country would be ready to host Russian nuclear weapons if NATO moves US atomic bombs from Germany to Eastern Europe. He also said for the first time that he recognizes the Crimean Peninsula as part of Russia and plans to visit it soon. The speech comes amid increasing tensions between Alexander Lukashenko and the EU over the current migrant crisis on the border shared by Belarus and Poland. Less than 2 weeks ago, Jens Stoltenberg, NATO's Secretary-General, announced in a statement that US nuclear weapons currently stationed inside Germany could well be moved to other European countries depending on a decision about which territories leaders want them to sit in. He said, "It is for Germany to decide whether there are nuclear weapons in their country, but the alternative is we end up with nuclear weapons in other countries of Europe, also to the east of Germany. I expect that Germany will continue to be part of nuclear sharing because it is so important for Europe." Asked by Russian news agency Rossiya Sevodnya about Stoltenberg's remarks, Lukashenko said if this happened, he will propose to Russian President Vladimir Putin to return nuclear weapons to Belarus. He made the offer to store Soviet Union-era nuclear weapons if Russia could no longer effectively store them. Those remarks come as Belarus attempts to strengthen its relationship with Russia. Pushed on what weapons he was referring to, Belarus leader went on, "We will agree on what kind. The nuclear weapons that will be most effective in such an engagement. I said for a reason that we in Belarus territory are ready for it." The situation between Belarus and the EU, specifically Poland, has worsened in recent weeks as the migrant crisis intensified. In a recent interview with the BBC, Lukashenko admitted his troops probably helped Middle Eastern asylum seekers cross into Europe via Belarus, after previously denying he or his army had anything to do with helping people on dangerous journeys across the border, which have killed at least 11. He said, "I told the EU, I'm not going to detain migrants on the border, hold them at the border, and if they keep coming from now on I still won't stop them, because they are not coming to my country, they are going to yours." The European bloc believes Lukashenko engineered the crisis as revenge for sanctions imposed on him and Minsk for human rights abuses following protests in the country over his contested leadership election last year. Lukashenko also said that the Crimean Peninsula, annexed by Moscow from Ukraine in 2014, was legally Russian territory, in a reversal of his public stance. Belarus is a close ally of Russia but did not recognize the peninsula as Russian after Moscow seized it in an annexation that drew condemnation and economic sanctions from the West. Most of the world still recognizes the territory as Ukrainian, and Kiev wants it back. Lukashenko said, "Crimea is de facto Russian." After the referendum, Crimea also became officially Russian. He was referring to a 2014 vote that Russia held as part of the annexation, which was dismissed by Kiev and the West. Lukashenko pointed out that any visit by him to the peninsula would signal Minsk's recognition of Crimea as a part of Russia, and that he was awaiting an invitation from Moscow to visit. Despite its close relations with the Kremlin, Belarus, a former Soviet republic, struck a neutral public stance in 2014 as Russia seized Crimea and backed separatists fighting in eastern Ukraine, a war that Kiev says has killed 14,000 people. But Lukashenko, in power since 1994, has grown increasingly close to Russia since huge protests erupted last year following an election in which he claimed victory but which his opponents say was rigged. Financial and political backing from Moscow helped him weather the protests. On the other side, Lukashenko accused Lithuanian authorities of dumping the bodies of migrants on the border between the two countries, a claim rejected by Lithuania amid soaring tensions over migration. He also warned that his country would stand squarely behind its ally Russia if the Ukrainian authorities launch an offensive against Moscow-backed rebels in eastern Ukraine. He tried to cast the tensions over migrants as part of a purported Western plot against Belarus and Russia. The Belarusian leader said at a meeting with top military brass that Belarusian border guards found 2 bodies of migrants left on the border over the weekend. He said, "They put a dead body, or, probably, a person who is still alive, in a sleeping bag and toss it on the border." Lithuania's State Border Guard Service rejected the Belarusian claim, saying that Belarusian authorities have repeatedly tried to stage and direct beatings, the crippling or even deaths of migrants while blaming Lithuania for such inhumane treatment. the European Union has accused Lukashenko of waging a hybrid attack against the bloc, encouraging migrants to cross into neighboring EU members Poland and Lithuania to destabilize the bloc in revenge for sanctions in response to Belarus' crackdown on protests that erupted after a contested presidential election last year. Belarusian authorities have denied the accusations and shot back at the EU, accusing it of failing to offer safe passage to migrants. Since November 8, a large group of migrants, mostly Iraqi Kurds, has been stranded in Belarus at a border crossing with Poland, trapped as forces from the two countries face off against each other. Most are fleeing conflict or a sense of hopelessness at home, and aim to reach Germany or other Western European countries. Lukashenko charged that Belarusian border guards also found several other freezing migrants who were barely alive at an abandoned farmhouse near the border. He sought to turn the tables on the West, accusing Poland and others of fanning tensions over migrants as part of multipronged hybrid warfare against Belarus and its ally Russia. He ordered military officials to raise troop readiness because of NATO maneuvers near Belarusian borders. Furthermore, the Belarusian leader dismissed Western concerns about alleged Russian plans to invade Ukraine that borders Belarus to the south, saying that Moscow would have let him know about it if it had such intentions. But he warned Ukrainian authorities that if they try to use force to reclaim areas controlled by Russia-backed separatists in Ukraine's eastern industrial heartland known as Donbass, Belarus would stand squarely with Russia. He said, if they try to launch a small war in Donbass or somewhere on the border with Russia, Belarus will not stay aside, and it's clear whose side it will take. They understand that, and that is why they started beefing up forces on the Ukrainian border with Belarus, even though there is no reason for that. He alleged that it was the West that fanned tensions over the migrant crisis in a bid to distract Belarus' attention. He announced that they understand very well that if Ukraine tries to unleash a conflict with Russia, Belarus will not stay idle, and so they need to contain the Belarusian army. Lukashenko added that Belarus has carefully preserved the necessary military infrastructure dating back to the Soviet era. Opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, who left Belarus under pressure after unsuccessfully trying to unseat Lukashenko in last year's election, denounced the president's comments. She said, such a person shouldn't be trusted to handle matches, let alone nuclear weapons. Tsikhanouskaya also added that the deployment of Russian nuclear weapons to Belarus would violate international arms agreements and the will of Belarus.